Together for the first time, the two new chairs of the Michigan Democratic and Republican parties. We devote the entire program to our conversation with Curtis Hertel Jr. and State Senator Jim Runstad, an off-the-record exclusive. On the panel, Lauren Gibbons and Craig Mauger. Sit in with us as we get the inside out, off the record.
Production of Off the Record is made possible in part by Bellwether Public Relations, a full-service strategic communications agency partnering with clients through public relations, digital marketing, and issue advocacy. Learn more at bellwetherpr.com. And now, this edition of Off the Record with Tim Skubic.
Very special program, gentlemen. I'd like to thank both of you for accepting our invitation without hesitation. Apparently there's something wrong with both of you, right? Welcome to Off the Record. Let's start, Senator, with this thing from the Republican perspective. Do you think, in retrospect, even though this is on pause, that the president's tariff policies are bad for Michigan's economy?
No. What the president is first and foremost asking is Canada and Mexico stop participating in flooding the nation with illegal immigrants, with fentanyl, with child traffickers, criminal element. That was the number one issue for the people in the United States and the number one people for the people in Michigan. He said, I'm going to put an end to this, and all they have to do is do what any ally of the United States on the border would say. Yes, we'll cooperate. We don't want to flood your country with fentanyl. And they're resisting doing this. This is the number one thing he wants done. He's nuancing this in terms of with the auto industry and pausing where he can to make sure that the auto industry is less impacted. But this is something that's got to be done in order to make sure that our borders are protected.
So tariffs are good?
Obviously, there's a lot of nuance to tariffs. Anyone that says, we know there's a direct correlation when you do this, exactly within days, that it's going to impact this part of the economy, we don't know. They're very complex in terms of what are the long-term aspects of impact of tariffs.
Well, listen, I think that actually tariffs can be a tool at some point, but these wide-ranging tariffs with that cause a huge, as the president put it, disturbance in people's lives. I think he laughed a little bit after he said disturbance. And when I think about people at their kitchen table, the prices they've been paying, the fact that wages are still stagnant, and all the economic pain that we seem to be in the middle of, the idea that president wouldn't care about those disturbances that are actually happening to people, I think is incredibly offensive. And when you talk about these level of tariffs, we're talking about, in Michigan, a significant effect on the auto industry, a significant effect on our farmers, that their job is to feed the world. That's what they do. I think that is the idea that a president would not worry about those people's lives. What he ran on was lowering prices. I didn't hear anything about lowering prices. And in fact, now we're going to actually increase prices for people.
Is he right?
It's going to make inflation worse.
He's not right.
No. With tariffs, there's a lot of impacts that could bring industry here to Michigan. That what we're seeing in this nation is an outflooding of our industrial base. This is to help bring some of this back. This is bringing some equality to these tariffs that other nations are trying to destroy our export industry by tariffing way higher than we are, or maybe we're not tariffing at all. So he's bringing some equality back to this. This is going to be helping the state of Michigan in terms of the long-term impact.
So first it was about fentanyl, now it's about jobs. But what I would say is that there are ways that on specific products, steel and other things, making protection on tariffs, I think can work. And I think actually there's a good point to be made that free trade has not been beneficial for manufacturing in Michigan. I think that's actually fair. But at the same time, when it's wide-ranging and has this kind of effect on those that actually grow our food and the prices that our people are paying at their kitchen table in a time when inflation has been awful for families, this is not going to make that better. And this was a promise that he made to actually solve our inflation crisis. And there's going to be, while he calls it a disturbance, I don't think a lot of people can afford a disturbance at their kitchen table right now.
Lauren.
Senator, do you think the president is complicating the message by the uncertainty that's happened with the initial threat, then the pause, then some tariffs going into effect, and then the walk back on the autos? Could he be doing this in a way that's a little bit less complicated for people following along at home?
No, it's complex. I know many in the media say, well, you simply do this in a little package and everything is going to be fine. And this is the way economics works. That's not how economics work. Economics is very complex. I have a minor in economics, and I remember going through all the charts and graphs, and they would say, listen, one thing has these other impacts, and it's not all packaged neatly. What he's trying to do is make sure that we are negotiating with these countries that should be our allies, that should be cooperating like any country would, to make sure that we are first and foremost protecting the border. That's what he's asking for. And they're resisting. They say, no, we believe it's our right to have an open border and flood your nation with all of these negative things that the people here in the nation has said we do not want. We want the border closed. It was the #1 issue. He's going forward with the promise he said. It's very unusual. Most presidents I've seen, Republican and Democrat, they said, well, that was all just nonsense I said during the campaign. I'm not going to do that. He's the first president. He's saying, no, that's what I said I'm going to do. I'm going to move forward. I'm going to protect your borders. I'm going to protect your kids. So this is the #1 thing. And yes, it's going to be a little messy early on, but there's a lot of messaging that is so incorrect that a tariff has this absolute impact on this one thing. It's very, very complex. It takes time. He's negotiating his way through it and following through on what he told the people he was going to do.
Well, I don't think we have a giant immigration problem with Canada. So the idea that we're actually going to affect people's lives, I mean, you said it's a little messy. Well, a little messy means a lot more to somebody who is actually trying to make ends meet, that's making a decision whether they can send one kid to college or afford to send two, whether they can buy prescription drugs or actually afford to buy food that month. We have the promise that was made in this campaign was that the price of eggs, we heard about the price of eggs all the time, that those would go down under this administration. That's not happening, and this makes that absolutely worse, and there's no question of that. So I think at some point when you say you're going to keep your promises, I think the #1 promise they made to the American people was that inflation would slow down. That is absolutely not happening, and it's no question that tariffs make that worse.
The idea that within less than 100 days he's going to bring inflation down, the price of eggs are going to come plummeting down. Again,
he said those exact words.
Nothing in economics is instantaneous. These all take time. There is no economist that say you pull the lever and instantly everything in the country changes on that day. It's not how things work. It takes time. But what does take an instant impact, what does take an instant issue with the people is your child just died of fentanyl because the nation is being flooded. 110,000 citizens dying of fentanyl every year because we have an open border flooding with fentanyl coming across this border. We need a partner on the north and south. And yes, I have talked to many people on border control and over in Canada and said, yes, there is a problem of people coming across this negative impact across the Canadian border. Why they say no, we insist we're going to work against your country, against your people, to flood your nation with criminals, with fentanyl, with child traffickers. Just stop. Just help us. No, we insist we got to do this. I've never seen a so-called ally that behaves the way that Canada and Mexico are behaving. Just help us. And they said, no, we're not going to do it.
So a couple things. One, everyone wants to solve the fentanyl problem. That's
them, apparently.
No, I think that everybody in America does, and I think that there were more investments in scanning and everything else that actually were blocked for political reasons. But at the same time, the president has praised what Mexico has actually done on the border right now.
Forced them to do it.
Well, but that was before the tariffs were on. So my question to you again is, why do the people have to pay the pain? Why do they have to pay more in taxes? Why do people that are at home trying to make decisions for their family, why is it worth it to actually increase their cost? That's my question.
Again, you're assuming that you have a tariff and the next day there's an immediate economic impact across the entire economy. That is not how it works. One of the things he did when there was one of the things, because it's not the same thing. It's not. It's trying to cause equality with our partners that we are dealing with in terms of trade. So what he's doing and has done is said, or if there's an impact here on this segment of the farm industry, industry. We're going to help them with some subsidies from the tariffs. So the idea that these things are so easily put in a box, it's not. He may have to make adjustments. He's going to be making adjustments on a continuous basis depending on what the impacts are.
Mr.
But he's
Margaret,
followed
Mr.
through on
Margaret.
his promise.
Chairman Hertel,
Yes,
what
sir.
is the Michigan Democratic Party's position on tariffs? You have certain members, leadership members of the Democratic Party in Michigan saying this is devastating. You have Governor Whitmer saying, well, I don't like tariffs, but there are some times that they can be good and we need to find common ground with President Trump. And then you have the UAW putting out a positive statement about the tariffs. What is your party's position on
I
this?
want to be perfectly clear that you can believe all those things, and they're not actually they're not incongruent. I do believe that tariffs can be used, and that it is true that fair trade has actually hurt the manufacturing industry, and certainly hurt the auto industry, and certainly hurt auto workers, and that's a fair point. At the same time, this chaotic tariffs one day, no tariffs the next, on all goods, not considering what the actual effects are, and what will happen with our farmers in the auto industry in the meantime, and the cost of goods for every family is wrong. And so you can believe that tariffs are a tool that can work. It's just that this massive number with very little planning and huge effects on an economy where families are hurting right now, that an entire campaign was promising we're going to lower the cost for people, and then to do this first, I think is a problem.
Gentlemen,
so I don't think those two things are necessary. You could say tariffs can be used without actually saying that these tariffs are a good idea.
Gentlemen, post-election, there was polling data that suggested a bunch of people in this country and in this state are fed up with the rhetoric from the two political parties, always bickering, always fighting, always charging with the other person. One, do you agree that that attitude is out there, yay or nay?
I would say the discourse has become more negative, I would say, in the last...
And they are fed up with it.
In the last 5 years, yeah. Some of the, on both sides, certainly, to the degree that you're saying that if this person is elected, and some of this happened on both sides, if this person elected, your rights are over. You'll be thrown in a gulag. You'll be tortured to death. These are fascists. These are communists. These are, when none of that is true, is beyond the pale. And yeah, I think that's very destructive.
Do you agree?
Yeah, I think we've had a Trumpification of our politics. I think that it's gotten coarser and meaner.
Trump is the victim of almost all of this, but go ahead.
You start your first campaign by coming down the staircase and, talking about, banning Muslims from this country. I don't know. I don't know if you can say that he's only the victim of it, but I do think there's become a coarser part of our politics.
All right, so in light of that, since we agree on the premise, here's the question. The relationship between the two of you, do you look one another in the eye and say, I will never attack you, I will not come after you personally, I will play above boards? In other words, can we have a semi-peace agreement between the two of you that you won't feed into this attitude that's out there?
Listen, I think that there are certain things that go beyond the pale. Having just run for Congress, I know the negative attacks that can be in the spin that can be put on things. I do think that there should be lines. I think one of them should be we never attack each other's families. I think that's a big one that I think is, unfortunately, that line's been crossed many times in politics recently, and I think it needs to end. I think personal attacks are inappropriate. But I think if we're talking about record, I got no problem talking about the Democratic Party's record, the Republican Party's record, or Jim and my record. I think that there is a space for truth and honesty in all of this. But I do think that the personal distortions have gotten out of control in politics. I do agree with that.
Do you agree with him?
Yes, I'm sure that Curtis and I, over the next 2 years, are going to find a lot of fault with each other's policies, positions, maybe the way it's being messaged, and we're going to argue about that. But to say he's a bad person or he wants to destroy the state of Michigan, no, that kind of stuff. should be left out of the arena. It should be the ideas. Now, what I enjoy as we started this segment here is bantering humorously against you and he, or he and I, arguing or not, kind of just giving each other a hard time in a humorous way. That's to me much more what we should be doing than cutting into somebody personally.
Senator, a question for you. We were talking about lowering prices earlier, and you said, it's not reasonable to expect the prices to come down immediately. President Trump did say when he was campaigning, I'm going to start making America affordable again on day one. Give us
making, not
okay. So
make.
If we start from that,
there.
What is a reasonable date for people in Michigan to start seeing prices come down again?
What he's doing right now with Elon Musk is, and I was just looking last night at the polling I think it was 54% positive and around 30% negative. And a lot of the media has been saying he is slashing these services. Oh my gosh, the world is coming to an end. And a lot of the media is pushing that out there. That is not what's happening. They're trying to get the budget under control. We're spending $2 trillion, borrowing $2 trillion every single year, and the people know it. They see what happens with inflation. Historically, always, the reason you have massive inflation, the government starts printing money, vapor and paper money all over the place, and now the prices are going up. They're trying to get that under control. Trying to get this federal spending under control is what's going to drive those prices down. The tariffs are not what's going to be having this big impact on the prices overall. There's a lot of nuance, and he's going to be working on that over time. What he's trying to do right away today, as you said, start today, trying to get the costs under control, getting inflation under control the federal spending. If we don't do that, this economy at some point will crash. The dollar is going to be worthless. The entire middle class, all their money is going to be absolutely worthless if we do not stop the inflation of federal spending, and that's what they're working on.
Is it reasonable for people in Michigan to expect egg prices to be cheaper at some point in 2026?
Oh, I think they absolutely will. I think it's the prices are going to come.
Next year, you think they'll be cheaper?
They may start coming down this year. There's so many things that we can do. Like he said, what we're going to have to do with these tariff dollars in some cases is propping up or subsidizing some industries that are negatively impacted. Other industries are going to do extremely well because now they're not competing with cheap foreign goods that are subsidized by another nation. So again, these are not things that you just pull a lever. There's instantaneous change. Everything's in a box. That's not how economics works.
So when they talk about cutting the cost of government, I think that all of us are for cutting waste, fraud, and abuse. But we have people that work in the VA that treat our veterans that are losing their jobs right now. We have people whose health care is at risk with the cuts in Medicaid, all to pay for tax cuts for millionaires and billionaires. This idea that we have to live in this chaos and that some billionaire in the White House has our personal Social Security information and gets to actually make the decisions on what's cut when he has government contracts and none of them are being cut, I think is a real problem. And so I'm all for cutting waste, fraud, and abuse, but is that the guy at the VA who's treating our veterans? Is that the woman that I spoke to who is studying cancer drugs at U of M, who's now lost her fellowship and might not even go to college next year while she's studying the future of whether we can actually cure cancer or not? I mean, these are indiscriminate cuts that are happening, and they affect real people. And while the minor disturbance may not be much for somebody who's a billionaire working in the White House, it certainly is to these families. And so, to me, that's the issue. So you say we want to right-size government. I'm proud to have that conversation, but it can't be done on the backs of our veterans while you're giving millionaires tax cuts.
The American people aren't buying this, that they're indiscriminate cuts. They specifically asked them, do they believe these cuts are really cutting the lard and the waste out? And they said yes, because the left is saying, no, every single one of these jobs is absolutely critical. The people aren't buying that.
Tom Barrett, who's the congressman for this district, who certainly beat me in an election, said last week that the veterans cuts that are happening, the cuts in veteran fares need to be researched. Because didn't do it until actually Senator Slotkin brought somebody who actually lost their job that was treating people in Ann Arbor, our veterans, and then Tom offered him a job in his office, but now is saying that he wants to look into these cuts. So it's not just, you can put out polls of what people believe. I'm not sure that that's actually what's important. What I think is actually important is what the actual effects on families are right now. And the idea that you would cut taxes for billionaires in this country and cut veteran services should never happen.
When the Biden administration was there, the veteran program was a crash and burn. What you're saying is every one of those veterans, those veteran administrators, was vitally important. We had to have every single one. No, there was so much layers of fat and worthless people that should have been drummed out of there. And if there are people that we need to streamline, not every single person there, every one of them, and every department all across the entire bureaucracy is all vitally important. That's what I hear from the Democrats. In fact, we need to hire more of them. No, we're going to go bust. There has to be some decisions made, and I haven't heard anything of this catastrophic free fall that the Democrats are saying, oh my God, this guy's falling. The people aren't buying it. That's not what's happening. They're looking very judiciously at these. If they have to move that number back and forth to make sure that the services are met, but we're reducing costs, that's what they're going to do.
I guess in instances where the federal government may be cutting back, whether it's research grants at universities, or I was reporting the other day about historic federal buildings that are being looked at to be disposed of by the federal government. What's the state's role in this, or even local government's role? Is there anything that should or could be done at the state level to maybe mitigate some of the, from your perspective, damage, or is this are these cuts across the board, Senator? Are they good for Michigan?
Well, I don't think that again, when you say across the board, they're being judicious. That is what the people are seeing. It is not just slash and burn. We're just going to slash all over the place. Elon Musk is using a laser beam, not a meat cleaver, as so much in the Democrat Party is saying. So there's some federal buildings that may come up for sale. Right now, in commercial buildings all over the United States, they're in free fall ever since we had COVID. People aren't coming to work at the same levels. So you have buildings all over the place that before were all full. And now there's huge vacancies on these things. So looking at what we're paying for these, how many of these employees are coming in, how many can we get to come back, is something that, again, is not something you just pull the lever, everything happens instantaneously. We got to be looking at the cost cutting and all these commercial buildings that the government may be renting or owning, and looking at that and where can we cut costs is a good thing.
The idea that they're being judicious is absolute nonsense. I mean, for example, they cut people at the Nuclear Regulatory Division that actually made sure that our nuclear weapons were actually safe. They had to hire them back 2 days later. They couldn't figure out where their emails were any longer because they had shut all those down to even get them back to work. So this idea that it's been judicious is also nonsense. In terms of your question of whether the state can step up, I'm not sure. Yesterday, what we saw was a budget that was passed before anybody looked at it. As a shutdown plan that wouldn't allow for transportation of kids to schools, would have cut child protective services, would have cut food assistance for people, didn't include Medicaid coverage. By the way, completely non-transparent. I watched my good friend here on this show, I think it was from 3 years ago, and said there should be 72 hours before we pass a budget bill, and complained that people didn't have more than 24 hours to read it. They had 20 minutes to read it and vote on what was passed yesterday. I mean, are you going to be critical of Matt Hall the same way that you were critical of the Democratic leaders last time?
What you're referencing is all these cuts is not cuts. What happened, there was a $47 billion budget that had to be passed last year to finish out the budget. The Democrats fumbled the ball and they didn't get it done when they had the trifecta. So now that's sitting there, and there has to be a negotiation for the Republicans to weigh in and pass that. So they said there's $20 billion in things everyone can agree on, making sure we're increasing the funding on schools and on the police and veterans and all these programs we all can agree on. And that is something that they put forward to be passed yesterday. And the Democrats Democrats all voted against it. But the situation is they're trying to make sure that we do not have a shutdown going forward. Mallory McMorrow in October said, we're going to have a shutdown. This we're hearing the messaging from the Democrats constantly. So they're trying to say, let's make sure we do not have a shutdown with everything we agree we have to have. All these other things we can add as time goes on.
I don't understand this whole fumbled the ball thing. Literally, Matt Hall left the field. He was sitting out in the rotunda. You can't pass a bill if a majority of legislators aren't actually willing to come to work. I served in the minority my entire time in the legislature. I went and made the argument. I went and fought. I never sat out in the rotunda and cried about not getting my way. We actually tried to make things done. But how could you blame Democrats for not closing the budget when it's Republicans who wouldn't actually go to vote and work?
The Democrats had all that time to pass that budget.
You can't close books in those times, so that's not true. So I was on the Appropriations Committee, so were you. So you actually have to pass it during lame duck. Republicans were in the rotunda, and now you're blaming Democrats for them not going to work. That makes a whole lot of sense.
Gentlemen, very quickly, the governor says we can't fix the roads without a tax increase. From a cross-political standpoint, as Democratic Party chair, that's a non-starter for you, isn't it?
What's a non-starter?
Raising taxes?
Listen, I think that...
Is she right?
I think that that we've always had to actually find revenue for roads. I was for revenue for roads when I was in the legislature.
So a tax increase is needed?
I think you need to actually solve it with solving the structural problems as well. So we have the highest truck weights in Michigan. We should fix that. We should fix the insanity of how we fund roads by lane mile, which is, or by mile of road and not lane mile, not where we actually have the most damage.
All right.
Counties like yours and Open County are actually a donor county when it comes to roads. We should fix that.
I need to give the senator just 5 seconds to say you're wrong.
As night follows day, the Democrats want to increase taxes. No, we do not need to increase taxes. Matt Hall has a great plan that all of the gas tax is going to go on the roads, and then we're going to use the first portion of the sales tax to fund the schools. We do not need to increase taxes.
Gentlemen, thank you very much. It's good to see both of you. Good luck in your new assignments, and hang in there, okay?
Thank you, my friend. Appreciate it. Good seeing you.
Same here.
Thanks, guys.
Production of Off the Record is made possible in part by Bellwether Public Relations, a full-service strategic communications agency partnering with clients through public relations, digital marketing, and issue advocacy. Learn more at bellwetherpr.com. For more Off the Record, visit WKAR.org. Michigan Public Television stations have contributed to the production costs of Off the Record.